From the Zoomerplex in historic Liberty Village, theZoomer, hosted by Marissa Lennox.
Welcome to theZoomer. I'm Marissa Lennox. It's the first thing we swear off when we're trying to be healthy, but also the first thing we grab when we need a little pick-me-up. Today, we're talking about sugar. Sweet, delicious sugar. For a lot of us, myself included, it is basically the hardest thing to give up. But here's the question. What happens if we do? Some scientists call it a poison. Others say it's not that bad. So which is it? To answer that question, it's worth looking at how sugar's reputation has changed from being marketed as a health food in the 60s and 70s to one of the most controversial ingredients in our diets today. Now, you may remember this Domino sugar ad from back in the day. Take a look at this.
From the Domino Sugar Bowl Kitchen come wonderful recipes that are full of goodness, full of energy. Yes, pure sugar is pure energy. And when it's Domino, you're sure it's pure. No other food gives energy faster and with only 18 calories per teaspoon. Today, serve your family a delicious treat from the Domino Sugar Bowl Kitchen.
As grandmother and mama know, the best sugar is Domino. When it's Domino sugar, you're sure it's pure.
Even just the way they talk about it as being pure, making sugar sound wholesome, even essential. But back then, people trusted it. And this one from Time magazine in '64 told mothers that drinks without sugar would not provide the necessary energy to get their kids through the day. These ads were super convincing at the time, especially when fat was being blamed for weight gain and other health problems. To make up for it, food manufacturers started replacing fat with sugar, and per capita sugar consumption climbed. Today, Canadians consume almost 110 grams of sugar per day. That's almost 90 pounds of sugar per year. To put that into some perspective, that is all the sugar you see right here on this table. But growing evidence shows that refined sugar drives inflammation, belly fat, feeds cancer cells, causes metabolic dysfunction, diabetes, heart disease, dementia, and other serious health issues. And that is why more and more diets are eliminating it as a path to better health. Which brings me to my own experiment, a dramatic change to my own diet. Take a look at this.
It is the first of the month, and I have decided to cut out refined sugars for 30 days. Not to lose weight, but to tackle what I now realize is a sugar addiction. It is not uncommon for me to swap a salad for a pastry at lunch or to reach for chocolate or candy before bed. And it got me thinking, could changing my diet help with feeling sluggish during workouts or those 4 p.m. crashes? And so I am starting this experiment with a pantry overhaul.
This, sour jujubes, this is my greatest weakness. 10 grams of sugar, 23 grams of carbohydrates. That's a lot. These are so good, peanut butter pretzels, but not part of the diet. Carbs. Oh, giant bag of lollipops. Cookies. I love these cookies. I love this mix. You know, a lot of the stuff in here is for my kids, bear paws. I'm not gonna touch that, but it does make you wonder what you're feeding your children. If you're not willing to eat it yourself, maybe your kids shouldn't be eating it either. This is another big offender, marshmallows. Not that I eat a lot of these, but why are they even in my pantry? Oops. All right, let's make some lunch.
So it's day 3 of cutting out sugar, and honestly, I didn't expect this, but I'm having a hard time sleeping. And a lot of people talk about this. It's as if their body needs to adjust to the lack of sugar or carbohydrates, and it messes with their sleep patterns, but it's definitely tough. All right, it's day 4, and the cravings are real. I mean, I have this visceral gut feeling in my stomach that I want anything that is sweet, any kind of sugar. I have to say, the first couple of days I had just a pounding headache that would not go away. And it makes you wonder why you're doing it at all. But today I'm feeling a little bit better, and also my energy levels are a little bit more balanced today. I don't feel that urge to crash right now around 3 o'clock, so that's some positive news. Honestly, I'm starting to feel great. My headaches are gone. My energy levels are finally feeling steady throughout the day. Because I'm not snacking on empty calories anymore, I really look forward to my meals. Day 9, I'm feeling good. Doesn't feel impossible anymore. I think I can do this.
When your baby leaves you all alone.
I did it. 30 days on a low-carb diet with no refined sugar. But did it really make a difference? Was it worth the effort? Coming up, we'll talk to the experts to find out what cutting sugar does to your health and if it's something you might want to try for yourself. Next. All right, welcome back. Before the break, I gave you the rundown on my 30-day experiment, cutting out refined sugar. So did it actually make a difference in my health? Was it worth all the sacrifice, or can we enjoy it in moderation? Let's bring in the experts to ask what happens when we take sugar out of our diets, and whether it's something we should really be doing. Joining us at the Zoomer Roundtable, Daniel Zaltz, Kalliopi Kyrani, Melissa Cosentino, Tamara Green, and Primrose Mharapara. So our brains run on sugar, right? Glucose. And yet you've got all of these diets, keto and carnivore, cutting it out. And so how does that work? Like, can our brains continue to function properly without sugar?
Yes, so your brain was running on ketones. Ketones can cross blood-brain barrier, and your brain can run it. But our brain also needs glucose all the time. And our body is so brilliant. And so if you are not ingesting glucose from carbohydrates or sugar, what's gonna happen is that your body is gonna take other products like proteins, amino acids, and fats, and it's actually gonna turn it into glucose inside so that it can get glucose to your brain. So your brain actually was being fueled by glucose, you just weren't consuming it directly through carbohydrate.
Is it better?
So the argument could be a little bit of both. It is great to have some kind of metabolic flexibility in your body where you can run on ketones, you can run on glucose, but you don't need to do that all the time. It can even be like a 12-hour fast, like overnight, can produce this. So you don't necessarily need to go totally low carb.
Daniel, now would be a good time to define sugar because we're told not all sugars are the same. Like, what are the different types of sugars they need to be aware of?
Sure. So when we talk about sugars, we're talking about different types of carbohydrates. And we've all heard of glucose or sucrose, fructose, and these are all different types of molecules that we know as sugar. So your table sugar, what you might put in your coffee, is what we know as a disaccharide. It's two types of sugars that come together to create sucrose. We know that the sugar in fruit is called fructose. We know sugar in milk is called lactose. These are all different sources of sugars in our diets. But what ends up happening once we eat them is our body breaks them down to that ultimate energy source, which is glucose.
Mm-hmm. And?
People wonder if there's a difference between the refined sugars we're eating, your high fructose corn syrup in a soft drink, for example, or a more what we might call a natural sugar, a fructose from some fruit. At the end of the day, it's all turning into glucose in your body. At the end of the day, whether it's refined or from a natural source, what's happening metabolically in your body is pretty similar.
Right. Mm-hmm. Can you overeat fruit?
Definitely there is a limit for fruit, and also in terms of our blood sugar regulation. When we eat fruit, it's best to be paired with certain healthy fats or proteins so that we can regulate our blood sugar levels from spiking.
Well, and I think that's where people get confused, right? Is, you know, we're told, oh, this is a natural sugar, therefore it's somehow healthier. I think about things like honey or agave syrup, but it's still spiking our blood sugar.
So there is a big difference between natural sugars and added sugars. And the difference is that the natural sugars contain also other nutrients such as vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, and fiber. And particularly fiber slows down the absorption and digestion of those foods, and this causes a gradual release of the sugars into your bloodstream, which maintains stable blood sugar levels. Whereas added sugars, they lack those beneficial nutrients and they quickly get absorbed by your body, and therefore it causes a blood sugar spike, which is known as also a sugar crash.
What about artificial sweeteners, things like, or non-caloric sweeteners, monk fruit and stevia and that sort of thing?
Well, we know that they don't raise glucose as much. We also know that for some people's guts, the bacteria that live there might not like it as much and might cause some sort of disruption there. And I think it's finding this balance between, oh, I don't want to eat as much sugar. How do I take it out? But I need to have some kind of sweet. I need to sweeten something. So that's where we find needing to understand, okay, what is like the lesser evil almost in this area? Yeah. And so it really depends on
I don't know, a gut
you.
Disruption sounds pretty bad. That doesn't sound very good.
It doesn't sound very good, but as
what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so the dose, I'm gonna say this a million times, the dose makes the poison. And so if I'm having a little bit of monk fruit sweetener, and monk fruit sweetener is known not to cause really any kind of spike in blood sugar, and we can talk about more what that means and why we even care about it, it's not that big of a deal. But if I am like having this all of the time, and it's in everything I'm eating, and I'm putting it in my coffee, and I'm putting it in my breakfast, and I'm sprinkling it on my yogurt, and I'm putting it like everywhere, that's an issue.
Yeah. Okay, but this is the problem. When you talk about the dose makes the poison, is sugar not addictive? I mean, that's my greatest fear when I eventually reintroduce refined sugars back in my life, which actually I hope to never, because personally I think it's poison. But that's my fear, is that once you have some, you want more.
Yeah. So basically, sugar triggers the opioid receptors in our brain, and it triggers our reward systems too strongly, so it makes it very addictive.
It's akin to like a drug, like cocaine.
It's comparable to a drug, releases dopamine and serotonin, and so that's why it becomes highly addictive. So because of that, it lingers in a lot of foods, and oftentimes we don't know where these sugars are hidden, and we don't even realize we have this addiction, and we call it the silent killer because some of the symptoms are not as obvious, and only long-term we see the symptoms come out, whether it's chronic inflammation, gut imbalances like you mentioned, from even possible artificial sweeteners, and then chronic conditions such as rheumatoid arthritis can be caused as well, and then obesity, as we know, and some diabetic conditions.
The most recent studies to look at how the brain responds to sugar cannot detect the same level of response to the substance as it does for something like cocaine. So while yes, it may be habit forming, and yes, there may be people who do suffer from addictions to food and food behaviors, the actual substance in your body is not behaving in the same way as something like cocaine, which develops significant physical dependence. So we need to be careful when we look at addiction versus what might be more habitual forming behaviors.
Can you just explain the process? When we consume it, how does our body metabolize it? What happens to our livers? And is there a limit? All right, well, let's talk about sugar and what it does in our bodies. Can you just explain the process? When we consume it, how does our body metabolize it? What happens to our livers? And is there a limit?
Okay. So when we take foods that are high in sugar, basically what happens is your pancreas in your body will naturally release insulin. And what insulin does is it lowers the sugar. How it works, it will push that sugar into the cells so your body can use it. So it goes into the cells, into the muscles, so you can go on with your day. If you have any extra sugar, so let's say you eat too much, the extra sugar is stored in the liver. So the liver does know that when you starve yourself, so you haven't had anything for 12 hours, what the liver will do is it will release that stored glucose and help your body to continue with daily activities. So that's basically how the body uses up sugar. So that's a good thing, but if it's too much sugar now, you constantly are running on extremely high sugars, your pancreas will get to a point where it will decrease the amount of insulin, as well as the cells will develop resistance from allowing the sugar to go into the cells. So then you have high sugars in the body. That extra sugar now sometimes goes into the liver.
And these are buzzwords that we hear all the time. Insulin and insulin resistance, and the whole world is obsessed with measuring their glucose right now. So if you could just help us to understand that process and what we need to know about it. What is insulin resistance?
Yes, great question. So insulin resistance is basically when our cells stop responding to insulin. And so how I like to think of it is like, okay, whatever you eat, it doesn't matter if it's a blueberry, a sweet potato, or a piece of cake, it's gonna raise your blood sugar to some degree. It's gonna break down eventually into glucose. Your glucose is going to then get into your blood. And then the job of insulin, like you said, is to kind of be like the bouncer at the door of your cells. Be like, open up, okay, glucose, you need to get inside. And so what happens is, for a variety of reasons, but one of them is, the more constantly that we spike our glucose, our insulin follows the patterns of our glucose spikes, okay? So meaning, when your glucose goes up, your insulin goes up right along with it so that that glucose can go into your cells. And once it's in your cells, it eventually converts into energy so that you can think and breathe and move and see. Like energy, not just so we can move, but literally energy so I can have my heart beating right now. And so the more that we spike this stresses out our body. And so two things happen. One is that our blood sugar remains high and our pancreas is like, oh, that's really weird. Why is this still high? Oh, I'm gonna release more insulin. That's the answer. I'm gonna release more insulin so I can get this glucose into the cells.
Right.
Okay, so it starts releasing more. So now you have your pancreas releasing more insulin, and you have insulin hanging out in the blood and glucose hanging out of the blood, and nothing is getting into the cells, or very little amounts. And that is essentially called insulin resistance. When your cells become resistant to insulin, the opposite being, we want to be insulin sensitive. We want our cells to be sensitive to insulin so that it can go into the cells and glucose can go into the cells and everyone can do their job.
And let's spell it out. It drives what?
Yeah, so excess consumption of sugars in the diet is very clearly linked to some of the leading chronic diseases in Canada and globally. So we're talking about having overweight or obesity, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease. We also know that excess consumption of sugar is also associated with some more proximal outcomes, specifically your dental health. And so we know that in the short and in the long term, excess consumption of sugars will lead to increases of many of the leading chronic health issues that are affecting us here in Canada and worldwide.
And that's when we talk about addiction earlier, I think that's what we mean. Like there are people that are consuming pharmacological amounts of sugar. I mean, that's just a fact. And you don't even have to look at people that struggle with obesity to know that it to be true.
Yeah, so I think the other thing we need to think about is whether you're choosing to or not. Here in Canada, 20% of all the calories in our prepackaged food comes from free sugars. So no matter what you're choosing on the shelf, and if you're not cooking it at home and you're not in control of all the ingredients going into it, 20% of those calories will be coming from the free sugars that we are trying to reduce in our diets. So whether you're choosing to or not, it is, in our food system here in Canada, almost unavoidable.
Right. Is there a way to know if you're insulin resistant, Kalliopi? Apart from just looking down at your waist and looking at belly fat.
So you can definitely do a blood work done with a doctor. So you need a requisition from the doctor and you check that way your A1C levels, which means this is the 3-month average of your blood sugar levels. And then if the number is above 6, for example, 6%, then it means that you may have pre-diabetes, therefore some insulin resistance.
You can also look at certain symptoms on your body. So if you find some skin tags, that might be a sign of insulin resistance. There's also looking at hip to waist ratio. That might be a sign of insulin resistance. So there's a category of symptoms because, to be honest, a lot of doctors are not measuring blood work for it. So the proxy is to look at your fasting glucose and your A1C, which is on any standard blood panel.
We list ingredients on our foods based on their volume in the food. So if you have a teeny tiny amount, it's gonna come at the end. But if you have a whole bunch of something, it's going to come at the beginning.
In the 80s, fat was stripped from a lot of our food and replaced with sugar. It is interesting that fat used to be the villain, right? Everyone blamed it for heart disease and for weight gain and a whole host of other things. And now we're learning that that's not necessarily true. So what is the deal with fat? What should we be aware of when consuming it?
I think when it comes to fat, try and avoid anything that's processed, what we're actually encouraging patients is to eat fats that are healthy. So fats that come from nuts, from seeds, fats that come from protein like fish, that's considered to be healthy. But too much fat from fatty foods, so deep fat fried foods, unfortunately, will also result in increased risk of diabetes as well as conditions such as fatty liver.
Where my concern is with fats in our diets is not in these sources like milk and cheese, but more in the prepackaged foods that have in excess saturated fats that we know are associated with a lot of the health issues that you just mentioned. And before you talked about this sort of change, this season of diet advice that maybe a couple decades ago it was let's have a low-fat diet, and now we're hearing no, we need a low-carb diet. And the truth is, there's a perennial truth throughout these trends, which is diets that are high in nutrients of concern, and specifically added sugars, saturated fats, and sodium, will always be associated with chronic health risks. And so whether a high-fat or a low-fat diet work for you, it's really important to keep your eye on some of these nutrients of concern, which of course include sodium, saturated fat, and as we're talking about today, sugars.
Well, and speaking of keeping our eye on some of these ingredients, I know this is a big part of what you do around labeling. So what is Canada doing in terms of changing the labels to help Canadians make better choices? And what does it need to do?
Sure. So Canada has just implemented a few public health policies to try to make our foods in the grocery store, our prepackaged foods, easier to understand and easier for us as consumers to choose healthier options. So most recently in 2022, we changed the way that we list ingredients, specifically sugars, on our ingredients list. So if you go to the grocery store, you buy a granola bar, let's say, and you look at the ingredients, and the first ingredient might be oats, for example. That next ingredient most likely will be sugars. Now, that's changed. Previously, before this law went into place, we could list each sugar ingredient separately. So you have things like sucrose, you have things like high fructose corn syrup, you have things like concentrated pear juice, which to me sounds quite healthy, but it's nothing other than sugar. You have date paste. So we have all these ways we can call sugar, sugar. And what we decided here in Canada is you as the consumer deserve to know more upfront that it is just sugar. And so in doing so, we've changed the labels that no matter what the source is, you must call it sugar. And here's how that's going to change your purchasing behaviors. You will see that listed earlier in the ingredients list. We list ingredients on our foods based on their volume in the food. So if you have a teeny tiny amount, it's going to come at the end. But if you have a whole bunch of something, it's going to come at the beginning. And now, since 2022, we've made sure consumers are able to see how much sugar is in their foods simply by seeing that it's listed pretty early on in that ingredients list.
That's something I didn't know. That's really, really interesting. I just want to circle back to the big question, which is, should we be cutting sugar out of our diets completely, refined sugar out of our diets completely? What say you?
I do believe there's no really purpose to have refined sugars. They're empty calories and can be a silent killer. And at the same time, I do find that when most of my clients get off of the refined sugars, they really lean on these whole foods and don't find that they have the need or the desire to eat these refined sugars anymore.
Also, when you eat more whole foods, especially high in fiber and protein, this reduces the cravings for sugar. So also this plays a role as well. So
And
that's why it's important to pair the nutrients.
And I just want to be clear about one thing, because we're short on time. But when we're in a calorie balance, so you're calorie neutral, you're not gaining weight, you're not losing weight, but the majority of your calories come from sugar or added sugars. are you healthy?
You're not going to feel very good. You will certainly not feel very good if the majority of your calories are from sugar. You will have symptoms of energy crashes. You will probably feel the low, the irritability, the hanger, all that goes along with, and I'm sure everyone here has experienced that before. So no, you will not be healthy.
All right, we'll end our panel discussion on that note. Stick around though, because when we come back, we'll reveal just how much sugar is hiding in the foods you might not even realize. That's next. Welcome back. You might be surprised by just how much sugar is in the foods you wouldn't think twice about. Tamara Green is here to walk us through a typical day of meals and show us some healthier alternatives. All right, so let's start with breakfast.
Let's start with breakfast, and let's start with a typical breakfast that many people consume.
Right.
So a lot of people will turn to kind of the simple carbohydrates in the morning. So we're talking a Danish. So here we have a Danish, and within this Danish, there is 26 grams of sugar. So that isn't even the total carbohydrate, that's just the sugar.
That's just the sugar.
Important to notice, right? And then here we have, this is a really typical breakfast for kids, adults.
And by the way, when you talk about serving size, in this bowl is approximately, that's a good serve, but that's 2 servings of Honey Nut Cheerios.
Yeah, which typically most people will probably have closer to 2 than 1 to feel satiated, right? And so within this 2 cups of Cheerios, we have 38 grams of sugar.
Okay, so I'm just gonna collect these little sugar balls, and we're going to pour it in this bowl.
Yes, here, I will pass these to you,
so that we
can
add it up at the end and just give you a sense of how much sugar you might consume on this diet. All right.
Okay, so we'll keep going with breakfast. And so we have our Danish, we have our cereal, and then typically, you have to have your coffee in the morning. I know I have to have my coffee in the morning.
I have to have my coffee in the morning.
Okay. But often people will have like a French vanilla style coffee. They'll have orange juice with it. So these 2 beverages together equate to about 65 grams of sugar.
All right, let's pour this guy in. Woo. I'm gonna run out of space in the bowl.
I know.
It's only breakfast.
We're gonna overflow here potentially. So imagine your body, right? That's the bowl. Now imagine your body. Okay, so next we're moving on to our lunch. Okay, so we've had our breakfast. Now here's the thing. If you're gonna have a breakfast like this, you are typically gonna be crashing an hour later, and you will be looking for your next snack, your next meal, your next sugary
You'll
thing.
be hungry,
yes,
right? Like,
you'll be hungry.
It looks like a lot of food, but it makes you hungry when you eat this much sugar.
For sure, it makes you hungry. Okay, so next we're moving on to our lunch. And here we have ribs, and we have a coleslaw, and we have French fries. And so typically you might think like, oh, a coleslaw, like it's cabbage. Cabbage is a wonderful vegetable to eat. Ribs, depending on who you are, might actually be a great part of your diet, depending on how much saturated fat you would like to eat and how much protein you eat.
Well, it depends on what you put on the ribs as well.
But there you go. So when you're smothering it in barbecue sauce, you're smothering it in some kind of dry sugar rub, any of that, that's gonna really not be as helpful for the protein that you're looking for there. And then pairing it with some kind of potato, here we have French fries, especially when you have a highly palatable and you're mixing the carbohydrate and the fat together, like in a French fry, well, you're gonna see a lot of things happen to your blood glucose inside. So just to give you an idea here, okay, for our ribs, so we have here 20 grams of sugar.
Okay.
Okay, and that's from the sauce, the barbecue sauce we have.
That's right here.
The coleslaw has about 15 grams of sugar, and that's typically probably because of the dressing and whatever else marinade is on top of it. Because coleslaw by itself actually is quite wonderful for you. Yes.
And even French fries, if they're homemade, if you're buying a potato and making it yourself, I think that's the key to everything. Stick to whole foods and make it yourself. But let's keep going.
Absolutely.
So here we have a glass of Coke.
Okay, so now we're getting into soda territory here. Okay.
Which is just don't drink soda, okay? I feel like if you walk away with anything today, it's stay away from soda.
Yeah, so in the soda alone here, we have 39 grams of sugar, which is quite a lot for one beverage, especially if you're pairing it with another meal that has all the other grams mentioned.
That's an incredible amount of sugar.
Yes.
Is it not? All
yeah.
right. important.
And so again, like I said before, the dose makes the poison. Now here,
we're at capacity, by the way.
at
There's no more space in our bowl.
Slight capacities. But you can see how it's tricky because you're thinking I'm having something healthy, I'm having something with protein, and it adds up, and it adds up quickly, right?
Yep.
Okay, so now we're moving on to our dinner, and this could be the typical dinner, which is spaghetti and some kind of tomato sauce.
Right.
Now there's no protein in here to balance this out, so your glucose is gonna spike real high if you're having just plain spaghetti. And in our sauce, so a lot of the sugars are hidden, right? They're hidden in yogurt. They're hidden in tomato sauce, and that's one of the big ones. So in this sauce alone, there is 20 grams per 1 cup. So 20 grams of sugar.
I'm out of space.
Yeah, you really are.
It may overflow. Okay,
Let's
here we
see
go.
what
Look,
happens
it's
here.
completely overflowing. Here we go. And our total.
And our total is 235 grams of sugar, and that's not, again, total carbohydrate load.
Right, that's just sugar load.
Yeah.
And we haven't snacked at all.
No,
We haven't had dessert.
Yeah.
Can everyone see this bowl? It's a lot of sugar.
Yeah.
So, we want to avoid this.
Yes.
What are some healthy alternatives for people?
Move with me over here, and I shall show you. So the key to decreasing the amount of sugar that you're eating while also feeling really satiated from your meals is having a combination of protein, fat, and fiber together. That's really the key to it all, honestly. And so think color. Color is always, to simplify, think color. So here we have breakfast. We have a whole fat Greek yogurt, which has great fat in it. It also has protein in it, and it has sugar from lactose in it, so natural.
But plain, right? Because the moment you get fruity yogurt,
yes,
the sugar content goes way up.
Yeah, it's like 19 grams per 3/4 cup, something along those lines.
Yeah.
It is a significant amount. And so now we've topped it with even more nuts. So we have good fats from nuts. We have flax seeds, which is great in fiber and fat, and it's got a little bit of protein too. So again, when you're dealing with a whole food, you are getting the variety of macronutrients because every single food typically has a ratio of all three. It just depends on what the highest ratio is. It carb? Is it fat? Is it?
And berries are great. Blueberries aren't they a superfood?
They're a superfood. They have polyphenols in there. They're like incredible for our gut. They're wonderful fiber sources. They're a lower glycemic fruit, so they won't spike your blood sugar as high. So this is a great breakfast. Okay, so now we're moving on to lunch, and always look for color. So here we have a salad with a variety of different colors in there. Every time you have a different color, that means that it has different phytonutrients for your body. But we also have healthy fat here in the avocado. And then we have a vinaigrette dressing. And within this dressing is something called apple cider vinegar, which is a common vinegar that people use in salad dressings. The reason why I'm telling you specifically about it is because there is a compound within it called acetic acid. And what it essentially does is it slows the absorption of carbohydrates in your body. And it's also been shown to make your cells a little bit more insulin sensitive, like we talked about earlier. So if you're having a dressing and you know that you're gonna have something carby with that meal, make an apple cider vinegar dressing.
And by the way, this is not store-bought dressing. This is just a mixture of apple cider vinegar and some mustard.
Yes.
Which is, again, key because so often if you buy a salad, it's store-bought, the dressing is the villain, right? It's the one that's full of all the sugars and everything.
Oh, yeah.
So make it yourself.
Yeah. And it's really easy too. Yeah. It's like 4 ingredients of that. Yeah. And then we have a little bit of sauerkraut here. Sauerkraut is a fermented food, so fabulous for our gut. And our gut bacteria does also play a role in how we respond to sugar.
Yes, fermented foods are phenomenal in the diet, aren't they?
Yeah.
Okay, sauerkraut and kimchi would be another one.
Kimchi, kefir, yogurt, miso, all wonderful.
Okay, and just finally,
okay.
This looks delicious, by
I know,
the
doesn't
way.
this look nice?
It does, it does. This looks far more appetizing than a bowl of Cheerios, I'm just saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And this meal here will actually keep you full, will keep your energy balanced. You're not gonna feel the high, the low, and that's because we have salmon, which is a healthy fat and healthy protein. We've got great fiber and color in our green beans, and we still have a carbohydrate here. Right. We have sweet potato, but it's a carbohydrate that also has fiber in it as well. well. And so you're not gonna feel the same way you will if you had spaghetti and meat sauce.
And we've dressed it up with just a little bit of olive oil, some salt and pepper.
Yeah.
A great reminder, by the way, to stick to whole foods. All right, when we come back, we'll get to some of your questions. That's next. All right, we're back. Time to hear from you guys. And the first is from Anthony. He's in our studio. Welcome to the round table. What is your question?
I was wondering how it's possible to differentiate between sugars and sweeteners, because when you look at a list of ingredients, there's sorbitol and all sorts of weird names that I'm not familiar with.
Yeah, so again, there's so many things we add to our foods to make them taste sweet, and some of them are sugars, and some of them, as you mentioned, are these sweeteners that maybe are non-caloric. Since we've changed the way we label our foods here in Canada a few years ago, anything that is a sugar, anything that provides calories, that is sweetening the food, will be listed as sugars. And so you can just look at your ingredients list and you'll see sugars, and then you might see some parentheses and a list of what actually went into those sugars. But if you see sugars on the ingredients list, you know that those are what we've been talking about, your caloric sweeteners. Anything outside of that parentheses that say sugars on them will be your non-caloric sweeteners.
Let me just ask one thing. What would be the one ingredient you want to steer clear of, if you could think of one?
If I can think of one ingredient that you can steer clear of in the prepackaged foods that you eat, and not to be overly simple, it would be any of those added sugars we're talking about. So there wouldn't be one, it would be all of those added sugars.
Yeah, all of them.
High fructose corn syrup. That would be mine.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Stay away from high fructose corn syrup. All right, Anthony, thank you. And Janice is here with the next question. Go ahead, Janice.
My question is there evidence of a relationship between cancer and refined sugar?
Go ahead.
That's a very good question. So over time, when you're consuming a lot of sugars, this sugar actually ends up increasing your risk of diseases, including cardiovascular disease, but it's also been found that it can also increase the risk of cancer. So there has been a few studies that have actually shown that people that do have diabetes or have fatty liver, from high sugars, have a higher risk of actually getting cancer.
And is there any particular type of cancer, or is it all cancers?
Different types of cancer, but Daniel, you want to add?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, high intake of added sugars is associated with a slight increase in the risk of cancer. And we think that that's being driven specifically by risks of breast cancer.
All right, Janice. Janice, thank you for your question. And Leslie, go ahead, Leslie.
Good afternoon. I'm wondering what the effects of wine are on the body, specifically red wine.
Is that your preferred drink?
Not myself, my husband.
Asking for a friend. Okay, go ahead.
Yes. So what alcohol does to the body is when you consume alcohol, wine, liquors, non-sugary ones specifically, what happens is our liver then kind of has to work on metabolizing that alcohol. And so what the liver also does is it always gets glucose into the blood. At all times, it's pumping glucose into the blood so that we can live. And so when you drink alcohol, what happens is it actually lowers your glucose levels, typically. Not in a good way, though. Oh. This is not the strategy to have lower glucose levels. It might seem like it. You're like, oh, just add alcohol to my meal, great. But no, typically that's not what we want. We want our liver functioning really well. And so even though there might be some benefits and some studies of red wine and the resveratrol and ingredients that are in there, I would say it's not the best for your blood sugar levels.
No, I would like to add that's why it's very important to eat something before you drink alcohol. Also, mixing alcohols can increase the sugar intake, especially, let's say, if we have a pineapple rum. The pineapple juice is very high in added sugars, so we need to be aware of that as well.
All right, and before we go, we'll just go around the panel, and each of you will give us your final thoughts. So go ahead.
Yeah, so we've been talking today about added sugars in our diets, and we know there's a bunch of evidence to show that it's associated with increased risks of chronic disease. The question of should we cut it all out or should we, what else do we do? I don't know if it's a question of all or nothing. I think it's a question of what's feasible for ourselves in our personal lives to reduce the amount of sugars we consume. And so for a lot of people, that might be starting with the beverages you're drinking. But if you're really concerned about it for the future generation of your children or grandchildren, it's also about the policies we pass here in Canada and the way that we make sure our food system reflects our priorities to have healthier generations beyond us.
I think awareness is critical here, and being educated on ingredients and understanding your labels, looking at your ingredient list. Do you understand what's on the ingredient list, or are the words complex that you don't understand it? So think of just what your grandparents ate, looking at the whole foods component. Has your food been chemically altered in some way? So just sticking to whole foods as much as possible, and your complex carbohydrates. And also, balance and moderation is critical and very important, so that we ensure that we're not going over a threshold of our daily intake of sugar.
I definitely agree with you, Melissa. I think for sure looking at the nutrition labels is very important. Also focusing on whole foods, unprocessed foods, high in fiber, and also having well-balanced meals that include protein and fiber, and just enjoy our foods. That's my opinion.
Yeah, focus on single ingredient foods, like the ones that we showcased at the end there, and really the color. See if you can get 3 to 4 different colors of vegetables, certain fruits per meal, but really focusing on veggies, and you will see an enormous difference.
Just wanted to say the body does need sugar, so everything in moderation. You want to enjoy life, because the way we enjoy life is by eating, but keep in mind too much will result in disease and illness.
And just to add to that, I would say this: cutting sugar out completely is not for everyone. But let's be real, it is tough. However, maybe a little detox to reset your system could be worth considering, as I did. That's it for us this evening. To get in touch, you can send us an email at comments@thezoomer.com. As always, thank you to my panel and to you at home for watching. We'll see you soon. For now, it's time to zoom out.